Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Identity Radicals podcast. I'm Mike Towers, Chief Security and Trust Officer at Veza. And today I'm joined by a longtime friend and colleague, Anthony Belfiore, former CISO and CSO at JP Morgan, Aon, and now the Chief Security Officer at Wiz. How you doing today, Anthony?
Great, brother. Looking good out there in the weather front, and things are looking good at getting past the election. So I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, glad that's behind us between you and me.
Same here.
Yeah. So what I thought we would talk about today is, what I like to think about is like Groundhog Day here, where, I'm sure a lot of people have seen the movie, but the whole idea here is that, when you've been doing this as long as Anthony and me have, there's been a lot of changes in technology, there's been a lot of changes in architecture, there's been a lot of changes in models over the past 25 years. But regardless of all that change, there's frankly a lot of the same root issues and root risks and some of the root principles, if you will, with what we're trying to guard against. Whether it's access, whether it's people risks, whether it's vulnerabilities. Maybe in the past we worried about it on the mainframe or the AS400 or the big Unix boxes, but now we worry about it on the cloud and other types of modern platforms. So that's kind of like where we're going to dive into today. So Anthony, let's start by specifically, because this is obviously an Identity Radicals podcast, let's talk about identity for a minute. So I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on how you've seen identity security change. What have you observed? Maybe regulatory shifts or anything else for that matter that you think that you've observed and you've seen that's really, really changed in identity security.
Yeah, look, I would say identity is probably the most unifying constant in our careers, brother, in terms of topically relevant issues and programs and technologies that we've had to kind of focus on. I mean, starting out, I think now almost 27 years ago, working for government, working for big banks, big financial services entities across the globe, identity back in the day was more about password security, basics on password. Then we kind of went through the local admin evolution that we dealt with. Then we started getting into directory structures and issues with application authentication and authorization at scale with big web apps. Then we got into the whole, let's say, certification ecosystem when SOX came into play. You remember we had to deal with all the access certification overhead at all layers of the stack, both the app and the infrastructure layer, the end user layer, regarding critical business processes and technologies that support them, and making sure that we had good access controls, good authorization platforms, very robust, resilient technologies that enabled all of the discrete identity and access management exercises and needs of the business, right? And so supports the needs of the business, I should say. And so it's been a hell of a journey. Like, what a long, strange trip it's been. And then let's iterate now on, let's just add a new venue, a new forum for it. Let's go to cloud. Let's get out there and let's start using new innovative technologies that are, give you great resilience, great elasticity, great cost savings, all the performance you're looking for, capacity, consumption-based pricing, all this great stuff. And let's just add another layer of complexity to the access puzzle. So all those other layers still stay, they're still there. And let's just add another level of complexity on top of it and see how we're going to support it. And now, how do we do unified access across this ecosystem of legacy on-prem, hybrid with cloud, and now the new evolving AI space? How do you protect your data? How do you protect your people, your processes? A lot of fun stuff to look at, brother.
Oh, yeah. It's funny you brought up some of the SOX stuff, and it reminds me of some of the most complex Excel spreadsheets I've ever seen. We're trying to gather and manage access control and do reviews, and just amazing what we've done in the past over the years for this. And I think of, travel quite a bit for business here. And whenever I go through an airport and I get through the TSA line, I think about this problem because of, it's like authentication, if you will, at the front door, but what can you do once you get past, and seeing all the evolution here with cloud and with SaaS, et cetera. So let's talk a little about, you close with cloud, which is absolutely one of the things that's changed the most, frankly, in the recent past, and obviously will change things in the future. What do you think? I know a lot of the principles are the same, which is what we've been talking about, but what do you think cloud and SaaS is doing to access control, and how is the approach shifted based on those types of environments?
Yeah, I mean, look, what I'll say is, with the invention of cloud and SaaS overlays, what I'll say is that, back in the day we had, you have the individuals, you have the humans, the end user accounts, but, we had, maybe service accounts that we had to deal with back in the day. Now you have non-human identity, right? You have a whole new, let's say, silo of access that needs to be understood, managed, controlled, and effectively understood, right? Which it's kind of hard to understand in cloud, right? Like it's a little different than you and I could really look at, okay, this service account supports this cron job on this asset. Like, well, that's a little different. Like this Lambda function's got this account that goes to here with this identity. And then sometimes it's this one, this spins up, spins down. The volatility in cloud, the flux that goes on in the operations on the back end across these CSPs make it very challenging to manage those accounts and understand them and then manage them. Then overlay SaaS on top of it, a little more boxed of an equation within the application ecosystem from an end user perspective. But again, on the back end, a lot of flux, a lot of diversity in configurations, technologies, depending on the CSPs, and instantiations of code and platform in ways that, it makes it a little more challenging to really manage that identity and access management risk the way we did historically.
I can't believe you brought up cron, my man. What a great, so many cron jobs. You got to love, cron, VI, all those things we used to work in.
Yeah.
Obviously, everything you've said makes complete sense and is obviously challenging to a lot of CISOs, their teams, folks watching this. And the only thing I would add, I think, about this is what I like to call identity sprawl, where, in the old days when you and I started, maybe you would log in once and you would have access to pretty much anything that you would need on one or two systems. Well, to your point, with cloud and SaaS, your identity or your account is replicated 5, 10, 20, 30 times across so many different areas. And then you multiply that by the non-humans, you multiply that by your contractors, your business partners. It definitely adds to the complexity and makes it much more difficult to keep track of and to manage. But in the spirit of what stayed the same, the whole Groundhog Day theme, one of the things that's obviously persisted is the human factor. And we know that people risks have always been critical. With all of this stuff that we're talking about, all that's changed, and you start thinking about things like social engineering attacks and more sophisticated types of phishing or what have you, how do you see the people element that's shifted along with everything else we've talked about?
Look, I would say people are the key to it all, right? I mean, the technology is really exceptional. We need to leverage it for a market differentiating experience. But if the people operating it, interacting with it, don't have good risk management, let's say, protocols or mindsets on the mind when they're operating this stuff, the risks are there. I mean, look, I can tell you social engineering has not gone away, right? Again, Groundhog Day, kind of, we're still here. When I came out of working at the US government and I used to get paid to break into banks and, hack into them back in the day in my younger years, I'd go on a 10K for a publicly traded company, look at the board of directors and call the help desk of that company as a certain board member from Texas or Oklahoma or wherever and get my password reset. Well, I'm in. You know what I mean? Because what happens? Humans are inherently helpful. They want to help. They want to try to solve a problem. If you come in with the right context, this is going to be very difficult to defend against, especially historically. We kind of got smart on phishing. We kind of got smart on social engineering. People started getting acquainted with these things. But then guess what? What happens when the masquerade is perfect with AI and deepfakes now? What happens when I call up with the voice of that board member, the picture or the face of that board member on the video call, right? What happens then? So the evolution has been an exponential improvement in capability for the attackers and the adversaries, right? We haven't actually, from a defensive perspective, come up the same curve on the defensive side to leverage those technologies in a way that can help us defend against it. It's happening. I see lots of startups and seed companies coming out today to go attack it, but I'd say the hackers have an edge, right? Leveraging the same technologies that we need to use for that competitive advantage in market, whether it's analytics, it's AI, right? They're using it for mass scale fraud and phishing and masquerading, let's say, right? So it's getting a lot more interesting. They're bringing more arms to the battle.
No, you're right. And the other thing I find interesting in this whole area from a human factor is obviously a lot what you're touching on is psychological and how human psychology has changed, especially with the advent of technology and how that may change. But interestingly enough, Johns Hopkins has done some interesting studies on this about how, for whatever reason, people take a much more personal ownership and accountability when they're dealing with their stuff at home, but they come into the office or they come into some sort of professional setting and they automatically assume it's someone else's problem. So they're not as careful and they don't think about those careful steps the same way. And I think that's an interesting dynamic that we're guarding against as well. Is how do we and let's face it, nowadays the lines are blurring between your personal life and your professional life from a technology perspective. So all of those things are factoring in, and like any good sport, we practice, but there's it's just an interesting element from a human psychology perspective as well. And speaking of humans, let's talk also about another, I would say, threat that's persisted, but obviously it's changed its stripes quite a bit, but insider threat. So this has been a concern for decades, but how would you characterize how our understanding and mitigation of that risk has evolved?
Yeah, look, what I'll say is I kind of classify it in two buckets, the insider side of things, malicious and unintentional, right? There's a malicious side to it where people are actively going after an exploit or trying to do something that because they premeditated and want to do it and they have a need in motion. And then there's the other side where, there's a lot of insider risk just because of candidly stupidity and mistakes, right? And the more complex these environments get, the more risky they are, the more likelihood you have that there could be a business interruption event in your massive platform, in your major application, your major business process because of an end user error, right? And I'll never forget when I was CISO at JP Morgan, talking to our senior leadership there, some of the top CEOs in the world ran our divisions at the time I had the honor of working with. And we'd be in these calls about, a P1 or an issue or a massive outage or a major issue. And, people are just like, you spend 500 million a year on security, you deal with 10,000 targeted attacks a week. How could this happen? And I'm like, guys, I could fix a lot of things. I can't fix stupid. You know what I mean? Like if you don't have the right trained staff, and by the way, humans make mistakes. It's human nature. It's going to happen. You got to build systems that are resilient against the human error, candidly. And that's really challenging, right? And so, what I can say, the most important thing on the insider threat side is one, understand the who, what, where, and when of like who's interacting with your systems, your people, your processes, the technologies that are supporting them. How is this ecosystem coming together? And have monitoring, right? You got to have monitoring. You got to have controls. You got to do things like the fire call around those credentials that you were talking about before, Mike, that were those super users, super pervasive golden keys to the company. Back in the day, dating myself again, those stupid R host files would give trust to everything in a Unix environment. Well, today, with the right, Active Directory credential or directory structure credential at the right level, you get access to everything if you're not careful. So again, protecting your technologies effectively, especially the access overlays, understanding the people interacting with them, and monitoring the hell out of them heuristically for what is normal behavior, what is standard behavior, and what would be a deviation off norm. And there's a ton of companies in the UEBA space, insider threat space. A lot of folks has become kind of old hat in some ways, but long way to go. And I think AI and cloud are going to add a lot of overhead and complexity to the insider threat angle there, man.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you said the intentional, the unintentional, and I would add a third I to the list, which is the impersonated, because I think one of the other interesting things about insiders is once your credentials are stolen, back to your point, most of our systems don't know that person isn't who they claim to be with their credentials. And I remember a story back in my early days. This was back when I was at GSK, and we had an account and a threat actor who was doing tremendous damage internally. And it turned out, talk about bridging even the human factor. The person who was infected downloaded a mortgage application that had malicious code in it because the hackers, talk about targeting, hackers figured out did some little bit of social engineering and figured out this person was trying to buy a home, and they impersonated the mortgage application, got her credentials, and then the rest, as they say, is history. That was able to launch something. And all of our monitoring thought that those credentials were actually hers, but they were actually completely taken over. And you're right, the whole deviation management and like building a picture of normalcy and looking for pictures of abnormality, I mean, that's really, really the only way we can address this, because, you know, you and I have been doing this long enough. I remember back in the early days where you would get a list of what was bad and block it. Then that list of what was bad got too big, so we started to get a list of what was good and block everything else.
Yeah.
Now, both of those lists you can't keep control. So the only thing you can do is look and try to build a picture of normalcy and figure out what abnormal looks like.
Absolutely,
yeah,
brother. Absolutely.
Yeah, great points.
Signature-based detection went the way of the dodo. Whitelist and blacklist don't scale.
Right.
You know, heuristic-based monitoring was our only hope, right? Standard deviation of normal behavior.
Yeah.
And, you know, so.
And the first time I got that phone call from the bank when I was trying to check into a hotel in the Bahamas, I was aggravated about it. But now I realize how important that is, because they recognized that there was some sort of anomaly to my behavior. But it's that same principle. You're right. Let's talk about something obviously you guys at Wiz do really, really well, which is vulnerabilities and vulnerability management. So that's another thing that we've been looking at for years, and we've been trying to get a handle on for years. Obviously, an ever-present concern. What do you think in today's cloud world, or our famous buzzword zero trust? You know, how does that change the game in terms of vulnerabilities?
Yeah, I think the way it changes the game is the technologies we can leverage in cloud allow us to do things that we used to do on-prem with like 16 different platforms hung together with dental floss, toothpicks, and, to your point, spreadsheets larger than you've ever seen in your life, and actually be able to quantify and qualify operational risk in minutes, not weeks, months, and years, allow us to respond to risk in a more timely manner, because the nature of cloud allows us to do what we used to do with like Qualys and Tanium and ArcSight and Archer and all these different technologies we bring together in the vuln space and try to hang together a view and try to figure out a discrete kind of threat scenario, and understand how it impacted us and then try to get it fixed. You know, we can do that in minutes in Wiz. 15 minutes after I've been provisioned the relevant account with whatever CSP you're in, I give you fully modeled threat scenarios, contextualized, quantified, and qualified with exactly what risk is there, what priority order you need to fix it in, how to fix it. Oh, and by the way, I give you all the lateral movement overlays and other infrastructures impacted. That's something that would have taken, from an OpEx perspective, exponentially more dollars, times, and cycles when we ran our teams internally of those big Fortune 100s, brother. You know, I had a team of 40 people just doing vulnerability management, the manual exercise and crawl. And we never got past our highs and criticals because we just couldn't do more than that. Cloud changes the game. It's a paradigm shift, like McKinsey and those clowns say, right? Like, oh, it's a paradigm shift. Like, no, it really is a game changer. What ends up happening is that we're in a position where, you know, we can actually if I can understand that threat scenario in minutes, and I can actually address risk between my developers, my production environment, the actual overlays of the apps running on them, understand the data impacts, the access impacts, the network path impacts, and fix them in those, and within a couple hours. Wow, what a residual risk reduction behemoth we've created, right? Because the rest of us were used to those long tails, keeping those vulnerabilities. I never got to my moderates and lows ever. It was never even viable or feasible. Laws of physics. It's actually feasible in cloud due to the standardization in the CSPs, due to the nature of the API technology that we leverage within Wiz and other platforms like it. Oh, and by the way, our ability to correlate and do link analysis at a scale and a depth and breadth that was never possible in the on-prem environment. Yeah. And that's really the differentiator, brother.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think from a permissions perspective and an entitlements perspective, you know, it's another, you know, the ability to bring that together and make it consistent. So you can look at permissions in Salesforce the same way as ServiceNow, same way as O365, same way as AWS. It's all anything that can help us unify and standardize some of that taxonomy.
The number one request we get from our customers right now is, when are you guys going to move up the stack and help us with access, with SaaS? Because we don't do that. Right, we're partnering there. We're looking for partners. That's why we work with guys like you. Right? So really powerful, but massive risk for their customer base.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of access, one more area I want to dive into that I think is frankly, again, another area that the concepts have been the same for a while, but some of the parameters have changed before we close out here. Let's talk about authentication versus authorization. The reason why I bring that up is that I think a lot of people depend on authentication, and they don't, frankly, my opinion, they don't understand enough about how important the access and authorization pieces are. So what do you think, just point blank, do you think MFA and biometrics are living up to their promise?
Look, I'll tell you this. I like passkeys. I like the evolution. I think we're getting better solutions. I think as creative as we were getting with out-of-band authentication and text threads and authenticators, the hackers were getting around it. They were figuring it out, right? They're very the adversaries out there are very advanced, and they're leveraging new and more modern technology to circumvent things. I will say the end user experience, I think, has improved, right? I work, full disclosure, I'm on the board of directors of a company called Hyper, an amazing passwordless experience, like really exceptional, right? Customers at our banks that have bought it love it. Like it's seamless. It's no more remembering 90 passwords, which I mean, I don't know about you. It's just called the password reset protocol for me these days. I log in, I'm getting so old. I just got to reset the password. I have no idea what I did last time. You know, it's just too many differentiation, too many variables, and it's just too heterogeneous a population of passwords in my noggin here, and I just don't know anymore. So I'm all about the innovation. I'm all about the new, whether it's biometric, whether it's the hello, whatever, passwordless. I'm all about that revolution. I think it needs to continue because I also like the fact that it'll start to prevent a lot more of these ransomware attacks from actually even being able to occur, right? If it gets done right? So yeah. I'm big with you on the authentication side, but I think there's work to do, and I fully agree. People are discounting the importance of the authorization in the back end. Once you're in the soft, creamy middle, how do we make sure that we don't let them just leave with all the cream?
Right. Yeah, I happen to be traveling this week. I'm in this massive conference center in this hotel, and I imagine a world where if we put too many eggs in the MFA basket, once I'm in the hotel, all right, I can go in any room I want. That wouldn't be a great experience for the people trying to get some sleep or what have you. So I think it's really, really important that we focus on both. As we wrap up here, Anthony, this has been great. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for jumping on with me. But, like we've been talking about, we've been doing this for a long time. We don't have to say how many years, but when you look back and you think about your career and some of the stuff that you've learned over the years, is there anything that you would look back to your younger self, your younger CISO self, and maybe give a little bit of advice on some of these areas we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think in my younger career, what I can tell you is I started to hit a wall early on, and it took me a couple of years and a couple of pretty rough feedbacks from some really great leaders and mentors in my life, guys who looked out for me to help me evolve, that being the most technical guy in the room doesn't matter if you can't convey the message in the terms that the business needs to understand it. If you can't quantify and qualify operational risk in terms that the business can digest, like me going in and telling someone like, bro, your IIS server's owned and you have this exposure with this attack from from this adversary, that really doesn't mean anything. What I mean by that is like, if I'm in there and able to go in front of my board or go in front of an executive team and say, hey, our online retail banking system has an exposure that's likely to be breached that has this type of data, that if I don't fix this in the next week or two, we're probably going to get hacked, and be able to, again, quantify and qualify in terms of operational risk terminology like financial impact, legal impact, contractual, regulatory. That was a huge evolution for me. I didn't really start making it in my career as a young technical cyber manager and up and comer. I wanted to get to that next level, but I didn't understand the bridge between technical expert and being able to see the forest from the trees, so to speak, brother. So if I could talk to my younger self, I would have stopped about 2 to 3 years worth of beating my head against the wall, not understanding why it was never me, why I didn't get the job or why I didn't get the next level promotion, and evolve much quicker to see the bigger picture. That'd be the best advice I'd give myself.
Yeah, it's great. I've been there as well, and I completely relate. I think one of the lessons that I think about in my early years, just to build on what you said, that I would probably tell my younger self is, you and I both started off with very, very deeply technical and, engineering focused jobs. And when you're an engineer, you're highly motivated and highly driven for high quality and complete pieces of work. And I learned probably too late that you'll never get to perfect. So build something that can pivot quickly and adjust quickly, and having the flexibility to move and shift and change as the environment changes, as the threat actor changes, is far more important than getting to 100%. Sometimes 80 is good enough as long as you have the flexibility to shift and pivot where needed. So definitely a great learning experience along the way, and I was fortunate enough to have some great leaders as well. So
1,000%, brother.
yeah.
1,000%.
Well, awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for joining. I really, really appreciate you jumping on, taking the time. Wraps up today's episode of Identity Radicals. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, in the world of identity, radical thinking leads to radical security. If you want to see more Identity Radicals content, please subscribe to the Identity Radicals podcast on YouTube. Scan the QR code on the screen. And everybody have a great day. Thanks, Anthony.
Anytime, brother.
Take care.
Thank you.